Welcome back, Honors. Oh, wow, that was way too close. I did not like that at all, but it's all right. So anyway, now, the Archaic period is what we started talking about today in class. Y'all started looking for your myths as well today in class, which is some really good, dope stuff. All right, so very, very cool project we're getting into right now, which I'm super, super excited about. I've never done it with class before, but I think you guys are going to kill it. Your rubric will be posted this evening after I do some minor little edits that I still need to take care of and create the rubric. The project sheet with the rubric will be created this evening. But the only thing you need to come in tomorrow with is this flip, and you need to get together with your group and decide which myth you're picking, right? So your group of 3, all right? So I think there's one group of 4 out there, or like 2 groups of 4. But anyway, so it's going to be awesome. We're going to kill it. So it's going to be great. Now, we got up to in class today talking about the Archaic period in Greece, which sees the athletic events you know of as the Olympics. We talked about how they had to compete. We talked about a lot of the big events and stuff like that, which is super, super cool. But we also talked about trading and things like that. But then we also saw a major leap forward in the development of Greek art. All right, so for those of you who have seen anything from like the Disney movie Hercules to anything that has to do with Greek culture, their art is something that stands out tremendously. All right, so mainly because it went from very, very simple to very, very complex, right? And the developments in their art, particularly that are going to actually grow and flower along the way, is sculpture and pottery, right? Now, some of you are like, well, Mr. Terry, what about the pillars and stuff that we talked about? And you know what? That's a really, 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 really crazy good question, Abigail. I think it's a good one, but I would call that more like architecture and less about art itself. But the architecture and the art is very, very important, whereas the art, like this is sculpture. And now, ironically enough, a lot of you are like, that's not that impressive. It's just a guy standing there. He's got no clothes on. I'm weirded out. Look, this is art, all right? There's nothing I can do about it. It's art, all right? So now, the art, though, as it takes a leap forward in history, the craziest thing about it is that Greeks actually the reason why they developed it, right? So Greeks developed sculpture early on to try and serve as tombstones or funerary monuments, right? And so the earliest forms of their art were full-figure sculptures, but they were stiff, very standing straight up. So as it advanced, then they added movement, made it more fluid, right? Like, for example, this person's foot is going forward. That was a major step forward in their art that tried to imply that this person is walking forward, right? And then also, as time goes on, we get into full-fledged sculptures like the one I showed you in class today of the man with the discus, right? So that show complete movement, things in action, all kinds of different stuff. Amazing, amazing artwork. Now, that right there is red figure pottery. There's also black figure pottery as well. Now, black figure pottery came first because it was easier to make. So you see this black glazing on the outside of their pots? Well, that is added to the pot. The pot's natural color is this red terracotta clay, right? So if any of y'all have ever seen like your mom's garden pots, right? So same kind of clay, same kind of principle, same kind of color, right? It's how it's baked and cured, and that's the color it comes out as. So the earliest forms, they would take a glaze, a black glaze, and they would paint that on top. And that was a much easier form of art to do because you're just taking an image and applying it to a glazed pot, and then bang, there's your image, right? It's black figure pottery. This is red figure pottery, which is so much harder because everything has to be done in reverse, right? Because all the black has been applied, and what has not been touched is everything in orange, right? So that means everything was done in the negative, right? Which is very, very difficult. So as time progressed, they started making red figure pottery. Now, let's talk really, really quickly, too. Put a little star next to this because this is very important for honors babies to understand. What did they use their pottery to do? They used it to document myths. They used it to document historical events. They used it to tell stories. Like, their pottery is a major, major part of their culture, their history, their art, their everything. Because for people that can't read and write, this served as a phenomenal way to be able to interpret myths on their own, right? So, and they also became huge luxury items, right? So they began trading sculpture and art and pottery as time went on when they got away from all the eels and the honey, right? So now, governing the city-states is another massively important thing, right? This is something you need to jot down. I am not going to make you jot down the ridiculously long paragraph that goes with this thing because I'd rather draw it because I think it makes a little bit more sense this way, right? So now, let's go ahead and change the color of this because I don't like it when it's in green. And we're going to hit OK. Now, here we go. So the way this works, all right, every Greek city-state was called a polis, right? So every Greek city-state was called a polis. Let's make me a little bit bigger just to be safe. There we go. So every Greek city-state was called a polis, right? Polis. Now, this is a common root word of a lot of different words that exist even in modern day. I wonder if I could actually pull this desk up. Oh, heck, yes, I can. All right, so anyway, now, so every single Greek city-state was called a polis, right? So with this polis structure, I don't like how you can't see my face. So with this polis structure, you have a root word in a lot of different English words that actually contain the word polis. Like, for example, where Superman lives, metropolis, as in being a large metro city, right? So, but the Greek polis is very important to understand because as time progressed forward, they begin to have a government unit known as a polis, right? So as some of these city-states began to grow, like Athens and Sparta, they had a uniform polis structure, right? So with this polis structure, wait, I got an idea. Heck, yeah, we do. All right, up on the stool now, killing the game. Now, anyway, so with the uniform polis structure, they started to add 2 parts. So you need to jot that down. Every single polis has 2 parts, right? How many parts they got, Jaden? 2. Good job. How many parts they got, Casey? 2. Good job. How many parts they got, Ann? 2. That's right, all right? So let's draw this bad boy up real quick. You have this area up here, right? This area that is a little bit higher up. And then we're going to do some stairs, right? Now, granted, not every single one of them had stairs, but I'm just trying to show you geographic declination, right? Trying to show you that one area is higher and one area is lower, right? So the polis was separated into 2 distinct parts. Now, this one being one of the more important ones, all right? This is called the Acropolis, right? The Acropolis. Go ahead and jot that down in your notes, right? But with this, you need to explain what the Acropolis is. Acro, the early root word on the front, right, means high, okay? So it means an elevated city, right? Now, up here is very, very important to discuss as well. What is up here is usually temples to the gods and goddesses, right, as their religious system began to advance. The Parthenon is on the Acropolis of Athens, right? So the Acropolis is one of the most famous and most important structures of the city itself. But religious ceremonies would take place. All right, so religious ceremonies would take place up here. Sacrificial ceremonies would take place up here. And all of the offerings and the priests would actually do all of their work on the Acropolis, right? So the Acropolis is a major focal point. It is the elevated higher city. Now down here is a very, very important thing that you need to know. And when you drop this word in college one day, they're going to be very, very impressed. All right, so you got to say, everything else. All right, so what's down here? Everything else. All right, so everything else is down in the lower end, right? Now, there were also like large walls that were built up that were used to protect the entire city. So you can write that down as well. Every polis was protected by large walls, right? So we got protection right here as these city-states begin to advance. Now, the city also, as it began to grow past those walls and bring in other smaller areas, those areas still stayed on the outside of the wall, but they were usually farmers, poorer individuals, and things like that. Now, what else is super important, though, is in the everything else, there is a major, major place of importance that you got to jot down real quick, all right? It's called the Agora, all right? So the Agora. Now, the Agora is the marketplace, all right? The Agora is the marketplace. It is the city center. It's one of the biggest focal points. It's very, very important to know, and if you don't know it, you're going to be in trouble come test time. All right, so anyway, now, the Agora, though. The Agora was super important because it's where everybody went to, like, meet. Isn't that easier to, like, that right there? Look at that. That's the Acropolis of Athens, right? That's the Acropolis of Athens. And as you can see, it's actually elevated above everything, and the lower everything else, walled main city, is down below, right? There's the walled main city. So I thought this is a little bit better. Oh, we glitching out right now? Really? Oh, there we go. All right, so I thought that was a little bit better than having to write down all that. All right, so anyway, now, so, but the biggest thing, too, though, like I was talking about, that is what we believed Athens looked like at its height. So as you can tell, the walls were erected around it, the Acropolis was above, and then here's the Agora, right? The Agora is massively important. Please remember that. I don't want to open my applications page. Get after it. Here we go. So if you want to jot a couple extra things down for the Agora, you can write a couple of things that I have on the screen right here, all right? So, like, anyway, so it's the marketplace. It's the important gathering place. People met to debate, talk, trade, and even have festivals that are like the city's special gods and goddesses. They're patron gods and goddesses because every single city-state had a patron god or goddess, which we'll talk about when we get to their religious structures here in a little bit. All right, so anyway, unfortunately, though, the only time that women were allowed in the Agora was during those special ceremonies, right? Which is absolutely ridiculous. It's so messed up, right? Because like women's rights were very disenfranchised in ancient Greece. They weren't allowed to leave the house without women or without a man's like escort and things like that. And we'll talk about those things a little bit later on. We'll get into specific city-states because they did treat women differently, city-state to city-state. Like, for example, some women's rights in Sparta were much more advanced, right? So religion, though, which is what we're working on in this project right now, is, there we go. Archaic Greeks believed that all gods live on this place known as Mount Olympus, which is an actual mountain in the north of Greece, right? So to discover the will of gods, people talked to very important individuals known as oracles, which are priests and priestesses that were supposed to be able to speak to the gods, right? Now, myths, that is key right there, were used to replace science that involved these gods and goddesses, right? But really, really quickly, just so we also understand, is their religion is going to evolve over time, right? The earliest form of their religion actually started off as small cults, all right? So that is an ugly, oh, wait, hold up. Let's back it up, let's do this, all right? I'll rewrite that. Cults, all right? So they actually started off as cults, right? Cults that would have a statue of a very specific god or goddess, and then they would have religious monks and priests that would pay tribute or do sacrifices to these different simple gods or goddesses, right? So it started off as simple cults, right? For example, Athens had a cult of Athena. Sparta had a cult of Artemis, right? Sparta also had a cult of another god as well. But these cult systems were very, very simple. And kind of like as archaic Greece, little baby Greece is growing, that's where it all starts out at. But then eventually it moves to encompass all of the gods, right? And what they're going to do to pay tribute to all of the gods is they're going to start moving to a temple system, all right, where they actually will have a patron god or goddess that has a large temple on their Acropolis, but then there will be, like, for example, here's the Parthenon, right, so lit. So there's your Parthenon, right, your large temple, and then there would be smaller temples off to the side that would be paying tribute to, for example, Zeus, or there's one on the Acropolis of Athens that actually is the Athena Nike temple, which actually is the victorious Athena temple. So as you can tell, like, it began to get much more complex. Started out as simple cults, moved to a temple system, right? So now, that's the actual Mount Olympus, which is actually really cool. So now, then they got into different warfare methods, which are very, very important as well. So this right here, very, very indicative of how Greeks fought, because here's the thing, we got to understand a couple things about them. They would use iron shields, weapons, and armor, right? There were two main things that were the defining characteristics of a Greek soldier, right? His weapon of choice was a spear, as you can see right here. Usually about 7 feet long. So this drawing is not that accurate, right? So usually about like 7 feet long. This is also not that accurate because this is a captain's uniform, actually. That would, like, a ranked officer would have the headdress, right? And also, Spartans' ranked officers, actually, there's one like this in like a conical kind of shape. Now, and then they would also have shields as well, which is their most important piece of armor. So, most important piece of equipment, so put a little star next to that. And they would also have their iron armor, right? So, now, here's the thing, though. They would actually... There we go. We already got that part. All right, there. Oh, here we go. These guys, what they're all called, is hoplites. All right. So as military progressions began to move forward, the Greeks adapted this concept known as the hoplite system. Right. So the hoplite, the word hoplite, actually in Greek means shield. Right. It actually refers to an individual's shield. Okay. So they believe that the most important part of a soldier's equipment was his shield, right? Due to the fact of this massive tactical formation, which we tomorrow are going to simulate a little bit, right? So, well, E is anyway. Now, the phalanx, right? Say phalanx real quick. Good job. Now, the phalanx is a huge tactical formation of heavily armored soldiers. I'm going to scroll down a little bit so you can see it a little bit. There you go. So, well, and I'll move my face. I'll move my face. There we go. So, anyway, so as you can see right here, the phalanx is just rows upon rows upon rows of Greek soldiers, right? So this is as their military began to become hyper-organized, right? They would actually lock their shields together up front with spears outstretched and the men behind them also having their spears outstretched as well, setting up what most ancient historians call a simple shield wall, right? So now there's only two vulnerabilities to the phalanx system. one's right here, and the other one's flanking from completely on the reverse, right? So being flanked is the biggest weakness of the phalanx system. However, in the ancient empires of the day of the Archaic Greek period, this was almost impossible to beat. Because let's say hypothetically we got Aubrey right here, and then Allison's right behind her, right? Aubrey is doing her thing, killing Persians, right? Getting after it, being a good soldier. She couldn't theoretically, she's a girl, but it's still. All right, so we're not getting into that right now. So if hypothetically Aubrey gets stabbed, falls and dies, Allison just steps up and fills her void, right? It is a very, very hard system to beat, the phalanx, right? So, and then we got one more thing as well, colonization. The Greeks, this is the last thing for today, the Greeks began to colonize, right? So as they began to grow and as their economies began to flourish, particularly that of Athens, the Greeks began to colonize different areas, right? They would have parent cities that would then send out other little small groups to colonize like certain little areas. The city-states grew rapidly, colonized all the way to Italy and beyond, particularly Sicily, which is a very, very important area. The Syracuse colony is going to be massively important later on. But that's it. I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit more tomorrow. I'll see you guys then. Have a great evening.